Well, hey there, moms. Today we're going to be talking about some of the challenges of marriage. And I think we can all agree that there are challenges. So let's jump right in. And as we discuss this topic today, we're going to remember that we live in the balance between learning some ways and means of reducing conflict and stresses in our marriages, and then trusting God to do what only He can do in us and in our spouse. So we'll be looking at some of each of those things. I read a book last year, I guess it was, called Love Focused. And it was really awesome. It talked about the difference between controlling situations and desiring an outcome, a needed outcome, versus influencing a situation and looking for a desired outcome. So let me just highlight that for you, because sometimes in marriages there's a mismatch. Don't you find sometimes, whether it's spiritually, financially, personality, maybe your love languages, your Enneagram, your interests are just very, very different. And so it can create some stress sometimes, or maybe your values are different coming from different families of origin. And so when I have a needed outcome, I need this, I can't be happy unless I get this, then that type of controlling attitude is going to lock me into myself. And it's about getting my needs met. I have to get them met or I can't be happy. Control. Influence is looking for a desired outcome. And it frees us to love others by being vulnerable. If a needed outcome doesn't happen, we get angry. If a desired outcome doesn't happen, we get disappointed. And disappointment and sadness do not negatively affect us the way anger does. When anger gets in the way of our relationship with God, that's what happens when we try to control. Whereas disappointment and sadness can actually cause us to develop our relationship with God by leaning into Him for His comfort and care when what we desire is not happening. So just a reminder about intimacy in a marriage. You will never really have deep intimacy in a marriage until you develop a really deep respect for another person's, your spouse's, point of view. Intimacy involves having a deep respect for the other person's perspective or point of view. And without that, it's difficult to get at these mismatches and to figure out ways to talk together and to work together to come towards desired outcomes without controlling, while still applying your best thinking and creativity and energy into influencing your marriage in positive ways. So that's kind of the introduction to this. And then I wanted to talk about John Gottman. He is he studies marriages. I guess he's a psychologist out in California. He's been studying marriages. He has a marriage lab. He's been doing this for years and years, has written a lot of books. And he wrote something a while ago that caught my attention. He said he can watch a couple in the lab interact with each other. And if 4 things are present, it's pretty much an indicator that that couple is headed for a divorce. My ears pricked up at that. Because our mission statement at Moms Mentoring is to help women, encourage women to apply the Bible's wisdom to their everyday lives, helping them build strong marriages and Christian families. So right away I was curious, what are the 4 things? So here's what he says. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. If those 4 things are present in a relationship, help, help is hopefully on the way. And so stonewalling, somebody said, well, what does that mean exactly? I think we kind of know, what criticism is, contempt, that whole, oh, you disgust me. Defensiveness, always prickling every time somebody has a different perspective than yours. And stonewalling is withdrawing from the relationship, the silent treatment, muttering, changing the subject, physically leaving the room, just, I'm not here. You could talk, but you're talking to the paw. So that is stonewalling. And so I've found in our marriage that small things grow big. And, we play hide and seek when we're kids, and I think it's hide and shriek when we're adults. If we don't address the small things, we come apart at the seams in a shrieking way at some point in time, don't we? I know I've done that, where things build and build and build, and I didn't address them, and then all of a sudden, kaboom, there's an explosion that happens. So I'm going to just outline a couple of the things that Dr. Gottman recommends. I just think they're really good. Learn to make specific complaints and requests. This is part of saying, hey, I have a desire for our marriage to be great, not just good. And so it would mean the world to me if. And then if there's something you have to critique a little bit, just learning to be very, very clear. When X happened, I felt Y. And I would like Z. Fill in the blanks. So conscious communication, speaking the unarguable truth. Try to stick to the truth in your communication around differences in marriage, and then listening generously. And we could do a whole session just on listening skills, couldn't we? Because sometimes we're really thinking about what we want to say next and not deeply listening when we're in a conversation with our spouse. Validate your partner. Repeat back to them what you think you hear them saying and make sure that it's clear. And then shift to appreciation wherever you can. 5 times as much positive interaction for every 1 time that you have to chat or discuss something negative. 5 times as much. Whew. Claim responsibility. What can I learn from this? What can I do about it? It's so easy to blame, isn't it? Or to make excuses. Think about what you want 20 years from now. Pack your pride away in a box. My pride has gotten me in a lot of trouble in marriage conflict sometimes. And just think about 20 years out. Is it really worth it to stick to your guns or to insist on your point of view or to try to cover your tracks instead of just owning up and saying, you know what, I could have handled that better. Or you know what, I think maybe you have a perspective that I should think about deeply. Because in my family, we always did X, Y, and Z, but I can see that it's not really working well for us. Let me think about that. Have the humility to be willing to rewrite how your brain is thinking about things. Well, that's his next point. Rewrite your inner script. Replace thoughts of righteous indignation or innocent victimization with thoughts of appreciation and responsibility that are soothing and validating. So important. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is, the Bible says. And when it comes to this topic of challenges in marriage, trying to navigate differences that can drive you crazy, right? That's just so important. And we can really just stop and ask God for his help at any point in time. More than happy to help us if we just ask. And then practice getting undefended. And I thought this was good because sometimes we're kind of prickly, the least little thing, and whoop, we flare up. So practice getting undefended, allowing your partner's utterances to be what they really are, just thoughts and puffs of air, and let go of any stories that you may be making up in your mind. Sometimes Lloyd will say to me, well, if you want to, you can think that way about it, but that's not what I said, and that's not what I meant. I have a lot of fun sometimes making up a story that just isn't even true. So back to our outline here. Do you try to control because you have a needed outcome that you want? I need this, I want it, I'm going to control this situation. Or do you try to influence because you have a desired outcome that you're looking for and you're willing to work for it, to wait for it, to pray for it, to encourage it, but not to control? Big difference, eh? And then I'd like to just read some of our Bible verses that go with this topic. And I will say that in here, just before I do that, there are some really big challenges in marriage. So don't overlook the big stuff. If you can't talk about it with your spouse, go talk about it with a counselor. Big stuff, little stuff grows big, but big stuff is already big. And you are worthy of having help and attention and onboarding tools to find ways to navigate these situations. I'm thinking of things like if technology is out of control in your family and it is creating havoc, that is something that a counselor, a peer group, your life group at church, any of those, a mentor, an older woman who might be able to just really walk with you through that. Don't just let that go unnoticed and unattended. And then I'm thinking of domestic violence, just struggling along, trying in your own steam to deal with that is sometimes just overwhelming and too much. So ask for help in that area. The same with if there's an affair going on, if there's pornography in the marriage that's creating trouble. Those are things that are worthy of help. And there's people who can help brilliantly in all those areas. So do pray about it, but don't just wish that it was different. Wishing is never a good strategy. So those are big things, and God cares about the big and the little stuff in our marriages. So our verse today, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. From James 1, verse 5. What a great verse. The creator of the universe, who knows us inside out and backwards, upside down, inside out, says, I will be with you and I will help you. And then some days, in a marriage, you just think, God, everything feels like it's just falling apart. So here's a good verse from 2 Corinthians 4:16. We're not giving up. How could we? Even though on the outside it often looks like things are falling apart on us, on the inside where God is making new life, not a day goes by without his unfolding grace. I love that. And I heard a song once a few years ago, and it said, I know that God can move mountains, for I have seen him move the mountain of my heart. And as soon as I heard that song, I thought, aha. Because as humans, we often have hard, rocky, stony hearts, don't we? And we just kind of buckle down and hunker down and get set in a way of thinking or a way of responding. And it is going to take an act of Congress or an act of God to get us to change our perspective, to change our mind, to soften our stance. I know that God can move mountains because I've seen him move the mountain of my heart. So take those things to God. Maybe your husband has a stubborn streak. Maybe you do. Maybe he's implacable sometimes and he's just like a brick wall and can't be budged on something that really matters to you. Take that to God. God is in the process of reworking hearts and minds, and he's good at it. So don't hesitate to ask. And then on those days when it can sometimes feel a little hard and you get weary of trying to be an influencer instead of a controller, don't give up. It's a good road, and it's the best work we'll ever do. All our lives, if we're playing sports, if we're taking piano lessons, we have a teacher, we have a coach. And so often we don't have a mentor or a marriage coach or a marriage counselor who can just kind of walk alongside and help and spur on and encourage. And, marriage is the hardest work we'll ever do. So we have a coach in lots of other areas of our lives. Why not for our marriage? That can be a big help too. So here's your last verse. Psalm 34, verse 7. God's angel sets up a circle of protection around us while we pray. Wishful thinking is never a good strategy. And pray and ask God, is this something where I need to read something to learn and grow in this area? Do I need to go see a counselor? Do I need to have a heart-to-heart, tender, non-prideful, humble conversation with my spouse? Is there anything I need to apologize for? Good things to think about. We'll talk again later.